Russia keeps threatening because its situation is getting worse every day. As it becomes known that Russia may have used 2 Oreshniks in the attack on Kyiv on Sunday, and that one of them crashed, Russian military bloggers are complaining about the lack of drones and that important cities could soon be lost. All this is happening while the number of attacks on Russian logistics is rising sharply, and the probably most important Russian military blogger Ryba is already discussing the possibility of a Ukrainian breakthrough. All this in this situation report on the war in Ukraine. Holy cow! Now save the most with my code at Holy. The Ukrainian attacks on the Russian oil industry continue. The Ukrainians report that they have hit the oil loading facility in Krasnodar. In addition, there are indications that a second Oreshnik was deployed, but it did not work and crashed over Donetsk. I have found reports that it crashed in the occupied area near Avtivka, but I have not seen any evidence or proof of this yet. That means, at this point, the whole story is still unconfirmed. Meanwhile, Russia is systematically announcing attacks on Kyiv and is warning foreigners to leave the city as soon as possible. This is a Russian escalation because of the terrible performance on the battlefield, and because they effectively had to ask Ukraine for permission to be able to hold the parade on May 9th. After the EU said it would keep its diplomats on site, the deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, Medvedev, is effectively threatening to kill diplomats. Russia also targeted a storage facility in its attacks. A World Food Program warehouse was destroyed with an Iskander missile, and we have a spectacular recording showing a Kh-101 cruise missile being intercepted over Kyiv. And here we see how the air defense fires a missile, hits, and then the cruise missile crashes. However, the Oreshnik cannot be intercepted to the same extent. You can, of course, find out here on the channel what the Oreshnik can do and what significance it has, but there is so much more to know, and often in the end, there's just no way around newspapers or magazines. Fortunately, today's sponsor can help out affordably. For my work, I have to read many articles in professional journals and newspapers. Often, these are only available in print or behind paywalls. Luckily, today I have an alternative, Readly. Whether it's Die Welt or the Washington Post, I can find national and international newspapers and access them with a subscription. I also find a wide selection for my interests and hobbies, such as Spektrum Geschichte, NZZ Zeitgeschichte, or Wirtschaftswoche. All magazines and newspapers can be downloaded, so you can read them even on a train ride in Germany when the internet is down again. So if you want to have access to over 6,000 magazines and newspapers on your phone, tablet, or computer at any time, you can try it out now without any hassle. If you use my link in the info box, you'll get the first month free. After that, it costs just $14.99, which is much less than what 2 or 3 of the magazines would cost on their own. And you don't even have to go to the newsstand. So, give Readly a try. The first month is free with my link, and you can cancel the subscription at any time afterward. So it's completely risk-free. Thanks to Readly for supporting this video. Let's move on to the developments along the front. And I have no reports up to Kupiansk. From Kupiansk, we have a Ukrainian military spokesperson who says that the Russian offensive efforts are losing momentum. A few episodes ago, we talked about how it was observed that Russian troops were being moved from the Kupiansk area southward toward Lyman, and we discussed that this would suggest that the Russian momentum toward Kupiansk would decrease. And that now seems to be happening. We still don't have any changes that we can document toward Kostiantynivka, and there we are observing a number of infiltrations. We have it here in the north and northeast of the city. We have it here relatively in the center, again here in the center, a bit further to the west, and a Ukrainian position. At the same time, here in the south, if we take a rough look at the map, then we have Ukrainian positions roughly down here. But on the Russian side, the Russians are advancing in this direction across the area, and the Russians are getting closer. Especially in this area, they're moving more toward the center, and in the east, they're roughly here. Mind you, these are always infiltrations. In some cases, we have evidence of bombings, which of course suggests to us that there must have been Russians there. The Ukrainians wouldn't use drones on their own territory that they control themselves. That doesn't mean the Russians have consolidated there. For the most part, those are probably just infiltration troops. But it does show that the Russian focus on Kostiantynivka is increasing, and that was to be expected. For the Russians, the highest priority right now seems to be the capture of the fortress belt, that is, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, and Kostiantynivka, and accordingly, the attacks there continue to be of high intensity. Further to the west, we have nothing until we get in the direction of Pokrovska, and there we have an absolutely absurd report, which is even viewed with astonishment by some Russian Milbloggers. Specifically, we have geolocated footage of a Russian flag being displayed in the village of Dobropasove, and that's directly east of Pokrovsky. And on the map, that's right here at this spot, here. So, far behind anything we've seen as contested territory so far. The Russian Ministry of Defense is already reporting that they've captured the village, which is, let's say, very optimistic, especially since we can see that it's a Russian soldier showing his flag. Even the pro-Russian maps are very cautious. Suryak is now reporting the village as captured because of this geolocation. Even Krimi Kapris, a pro-Russian, shows that the northernmost geolocations in this region only reach this point. And we see here that these are even Ukrainian at this point. That means he places the Russians quite a bit further away, and even the Ukrainian and generally reliable Petrenko shows us that the Russian troops, even in the contested area, are still far from the village of Dobopra, Pasoe, are far from Pasoe, or the Russians are far from it. Altogether, it's about 10 kilometers behind the front line, which is almost certainly accurate. So far, I haven't seen any comments saying that these are AI-generated, that these are AI-generated images. But in all likelihood, it's a Russian soldier who managed to infiltrate and advance 10 kilometers into the rear area, shows his flag there, and now that's being reported as captured. But if this village is now officially captured, how do you get approval for glide bomb attacks or artillery strikes there if they're needed? Because this area is now officially in Russian possession. And of course, you can keep asking what that means for the Russian artillery if the front is supposedly already dozens of kilometers further ahead. Basically, that would require moving your own artillery forward in order to keep providing support. So that would mean it would have to be brought closer to the front. Overall, these Russian reports are good for propaganda, but nothing else, because they create a completely false picture. And if even one person on the Russian side seriously believes that they control this village, the situation along the entire front will weaken. In recent editions, we've repeatedly pointed out that, for example, if a village is declared to be under Russian control, the units at the front are then expected to actually bring it under control in a timely manner. And that, in turn, tells the Ukrainians where they can expect the most intense attacks, which allows them to prepare and thus causes particularly heavy Russian losses. We continue further south, towards Zaporizhzhia, and there we once again refer to Russian Milbloggers. Here, call sign Osetin, or Nom de Guerre Osetin, says our soldiers are having a very hard time there. The area is swarming with Ukrainians. I still don't understand where they get so many people from. Our guys repel one attack after another, but they keep pushing forward. I'll say it again. If we don't immediately send either drone pilots or simply thousands of drones there, it's going to get even harder for us. And giving up the city of Stepanohursk would be a huge loss, believe me. So he's already talking about the possibility that the city of Stepanohursk could be lost. It's time to solve this acute problem in this area. The lack of drones has already led to several settlements before Stepanohursk falling. And at this pace, the news from there won't be good either. So we're talking about this area, that Stepanohursk is increasingly under threat and will fall. And the area north of it, which was under control, has already fallen back to the Ukrainians. Anatoly Radov also wrote about this 2 days ago in connection with the attack on Kyiv. The crucial point about these costly retaliatory strikes, meaning the attack on Kyiv, is that there is a catastrophic shortage of Mavics and UAVs, in other words, drones, at the front. The Ukrainians have a 2 to 3-fold advantage over us in that respect, which is why the notorious spring and summer offensive has simply turned into a tough, costly infiltration without any significant results. And in some places, there are no results at all, and even the Ukrainians are advancing. Just as a reminder, in the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions, the enemy is advancing. Molotov Machka has already become a meme among the Ukrainians. Soon, they will be making memes about Stepanohersk as well. So there are still depressing reports from Russian Milbloggers, especially about this area of the front. A drastic Russian disadvantage in drones is also being reported here. Overall, the Russians have captured 33 square kilometers so far this month. That's a square with sides of just 5.7 kilometers. So, 5.7 kilometers straight ahead, then turn right and go 5.7 kilometers at a 90-degree angle. And that's basically this square. And that's all the Russians have captured this month. In all likelihood, with losses solidly in the 5 figures. Estimates suggest that the Russians, at least according to the Ukrainians, could suffer up to 50,000 casualties this month. All that for 33 square kilometers so far. Meanwhile, attacks on Russian logistics continue. For example, here a fuel truck was hit. Right here in the south near Berdyansk on the Sea of Azov. A fuel tank was also hit in Luhansk. Here, deep in the rear area, again, where of course the fuel supply for the Russian armed forces is being weakened. And Azov has released videos here of its attacks south of the Sea of Azov. We can take a quick look at them here. Here we can also see the good video quality during these attacks, where the vehicles below can be identified. We can also tell by the small squares that there is AI support here for target identification. There we see the large number of drones and vehicles that can be seen there. And accordingly, impacts on the different vehicles. Here we can see that was, for example, also very good. We can see an impact here, which shows that a second drone is already so close that it can see the first ones in action. That's how it goes. Video after video, where one military truck after another gets hit, and impacts can be seen. And personally, I find what we're seeing here the most impressive. Here, we have 3 Russian vehicles at this spot, which are being attacked by the Ukrainians. And we see that immediately afterwards, the other 2 vehicles are also attacked. And this is significant, because it shows that the Russians are not only being attacked in depth, but that the Ukrainians now have so much presence on the ground that they can attack one vehicle after another in quick succession. And that's the big crucial point. The question isn't whether the Ukrainians can attack there. That's bad enough for the Russians. But the main question is how many attacks the Ukrainians can carry out there. If it's 3 destroyed trucks every day, that's just pinpricks. That annoys the Russians, that bothers the Russians, but realistically, it won't bring them to their knees. It all depends on the volume. Quantity has its own quality here, without a doubt. And here is a collage from just 3 videos, where numerous attacks have already been recorded. But let's just refer to what the Russians themselves are saying. Yuri Kotenok says, "We must not forget that we don't have normal rail deliveries, let alone air deliveries. Everything that comes into the region comes by road. So the Hornets are therefore a gigantic problem because everything comes by road." And even Reba comments, "The danger is not only that the tourist season in Crimea will be cancelled, or that there will be shortages of certain foods on the peninsula. The attacks on freight companies on the peninsula have a direct impact on the combat effectiveness of the Russian armed forces on the southern fronts, where the situation is already tense. Given the fact that Ukrainian units have already partially crippled logistics in southern Russia along the land corridor to Crimea, it's not hard to guess what will happen if the Ukrainian armed forces manage to break through the Russian defense lines at the Kamenskoye-Sherbaki line. That doesn't mean that Reba is already saying they will break through, but we've reached a point where people are once again discussing and talking about the possibility that the Ukrainians could achieve greater successes on the ground. And of course, that's already a drastic change compared to what we've seen. For example, since the fall and winter of 2023, when the Russians were practically on the offensive non-stop, except for the Ukrainian advance into the Kursk region. But now, and that's also spectacular, there are FPV drone operations taking place deep in the rear areas. Here, 70 kilometers behind the front, FPV drones are now flying, which were obviously brought in by other drones. It is conceivable that these Hornets, for example, could bring FPVs forward so that they can be deployed there. So even there, the danger increases rapidly, of course, because an FPV is significantly cheaper than what is otherwise used. And where railways do exist, we just had Yuri Kotelnok, who says that actually everything is transported by truck. A major attack just took place where railways exist, specifically in Debaltsevo. There is one of the largest Ukrainian marshalling yards, which is of course responsible for logistics in the east. That's on the Russian-occupied side, and there, firms has now identified large fires, so a major attack also took place there. But that's not all. 13 Tactical, the Russian Milblogger, writes that supposedly Hornet drones are already over Crimea. Here, literally, over Sevastopol, balloons were shot down that were carrying fast electronic drones, the type of winged drones that are currently causing trouble on the streets in the new territories. That means, according to him, it may already be the case that drones comparable to those are heading south. The balloons fly at an altitude of 5,000 to 7,000 meters until they reach the desired area, after which they drop the kamikaze drones. This time, the drones were shot down over the city. So possibly soon also over Crimea itself, there will be the use of drones normally deployed far behind the lines, because Crimea no longer has any real rear area. Now the whole thing is of course made possible by the systematic wearing down of Russian air defenses, which has been happening since the beginning of the war, but has absolutely intensified in recent months. Ukraine says it destroyed twice as many systems in April as it did in October 2025. By now, Russia is clearly losing more than they can produce, and the destruction continues. Here, Magyar is again reporting destruction, and for example, we have footage of an attack on an SS-300 Tel, which is a launch vehicle for the SS-300 air defense system identified here by Ukrainian drones. We see that the first one identified it and probably reported it. The next one attacks, and we see an impact here. That means another one is already on its way to carry out the attacks. And in addition to the attacks on this launch vehicle, there are also attacks on radar equipment. That means Russian air defense continues to be systematically targeted in the rear area. And if that wasn't enough, it's now being reported that partisans have set fire to a Russian aircraft at a Russian airfield. However, damage has not yet been confirmed here. And if we look at the satellite map, there probably weren't any aircraft there. Reports say there may have been injuries and people taken to the hospital. But what happened is still unclear. But just as spectacular, RIA Novosti reports that an LPG tanker had 2 limpet mines on board when it arrived in Ostlunga. The ship had departed from Antwerp and was delayed there for 24 hours due to a strike before setting sail. Obviously, someone used this opportunity to attach limpet mines, which however did not detonate this time. And all this while, on the Ukrainian side, arms production is of course continuing. Here, this Belgian OSINT account has now identified that in a picture of a Bogdana, the serial number can be seen. And according to that, 89 have been produced since January 2026. Ukraine is probably by far the largest producer of artillery pieces in the West by now. However, we still need to make at least a critical assessment of the source here. While this is of course an indication of how many have been produced, historically, it has been common practice in such cases to alter the numbers a bit. For example, skipping blocks of 10 or doing similar things, just to prevent the enemy from figuring out how much has been produced based on serial numbers. Because it obviously plays a big role that the enemy doesn't know exactly how strong you are, especially during an ongoing war. Beforehand, you might want to appear especially strong to deter. But during an ongoing war, you don't necessarily want the enemy to know how many weapons you're producing. And accordingly, it can make sense to skip entire blocks of 10, for example. So this doesn't necessarily mean that 89 Bogdanas were actually produced in the meantime. Of course, it can also go the other way. Of course, you can also increase part of the serial number by 100, 500, or 1000, making sure that the ones found have lower numbers, because some were separated into a different number sequence. Or you could reuse numbers from destroyed vehicles, hiding it this way, and so on and so forth. That means we just have to understand that a serial number itself, especially in this context, is not ultimately decisive the way it might be in other contexts. And that's it for today's situation report. If you enjoyed it, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to Readly. It's a great offer and really gives you a good opportunity to read newspapers and magazines. And if you liked it, as I said, I'd be happy to see you again tomorrow at 8 p.m. German time is the next live stream with a situation report and a subsequent Q&A session. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you don't miss it. That's all from me for now. Thank you for your attention. See you soon. At this point, Torsten Heinrich would also like to give special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Mahamuri, as well as Lieutenant Jans vom Eck, Uwe de Vren, nicknamed Tabib, Karsten Schultz, Robert Veal, Vision Sound Lab, Lick Chatter, NTX, Malermeister Nagel, Marcus F., Alex Rosenthal, Matt Best, Sickwriter 666, Sickwriter 666, Motor 1000 Yanis Gu, Sasha Müller, Cunningham, and Eustress. Thank you very much. Without you, this would not be possible.